All right, everyone. Welcome to the Raw Approach. I'm Dr. Woods, and I have with me today the famous Mr. Robert Matthews.
Famous, okay.
I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell a little bit about himself, and we're going to dive all the way in from there.
Okay, well, I'm Robert L. Matthews. I'm a native of Nashville, Tennessee. I currently reside in the nation's capital, District of Columbia, and I am a proud alumni of Tennessee State University, and majored in social science. And then I received my bachelor's in public administration. I have worked in the field of child welfare for well over 20 plus years, worked in the state of Tennessee, the state of Maryland, again, Washington, D.C., and have done some philanthropy work. And now I'm at a nonprofit that is pretty much a research and design lab. So I serve as their current chief program officer.
All right. For those that are joining, a lot of the information that we talk about deals with leadership, change in leadership, things that we as leaders have to experience in today's society. And today I just wanted to bring Robert on to discuss making a change in leadership, as he has been through many different organizations, and each time he has moved to an organization, he has made changes. Some of the changes have been more positive than others, which we all know, which is in this child welfare industry. It's a very difficult job. But I always say somebody has to do it, and most importantly, someone has to lead it. And I just want to dive straight in. Of course, anyone that knows anything about Nashville, Tennessee, or just child welfare in Tennessee as a whole, they was up under a Brian A. lawsuit for many years. And I'm very excited. Would like for you to explain the lawsuit that was Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
D.C. was in, and what steps you had to take to get everybody together to get on in order to make a change to get away from funding that lawsuit. So that's a major piece.
True. So Washington, D.C. was under a lawsuit back in 1989, and it was for the purpose of where children in foster care were not receiving the services and support that they needed. So it was at that time in history, workers didn't have mobile phones, they didn't have computers. If you wanted to know where a child was placed, they had to look on a piece of paper, and that wasn't necessarily accurate. Child protection investigations, the quality, they lacked the quality. Staff lacked training. And so also the Child Welfare Agency did not have the necessary child information systems to do all of the tracking that they need to do. So it was led as a class action lawsuit. It stayed in existence for 32 years. I was at the agency for 11 of those years, served in a number of roles, a number of deputy roles. If I had to think about the impact, it's especially how it pertains to leadership, I always think about how you assemble a team. Oftentimes, when there are successes or achievements, the person at the top takes the credit. But I do think a true attribute to a leader acknowledges that it takes a great team to really do the things that need to happen. And so I will always credit the great team at Child and Family Services in Washington, D.C. Very high skilled, very determined, very innovative in their approach to addressing many of the complex child welfare issues. So one of the things I did was looked at the data. Every area or department that I provided leadership over, I looked at the data, and the data tells a story. It's not just numbers, there's stories behind the numbers. But what I learned is that social workers who actually do the direct service with families, as great as they are, they also need to understand the data. They need to understand their role in it. They need to understand that when you're placing a child in one place and they have to go to another, placement instability will show the emotional instability of youth. And they go from place to place, from adult to adult, they're not able to build that rapport and trust with that adult. You're looking at child protective services where you're keeping investigations open, or you're not responding out on the scene as quick as you need to, or the lack of mental and behavioral health services to help stabilize those placements. All of those were reasons of why we were in the lawsuit. And what we would do was bring together both program team, social workers, and data analysts to do what I called, I created this process called the finish line. Every month we'd go through every single data piece. We would look at how well we're performing. We also would look at the areas where a need for improvement. Oftentimes, leaders like to look at, okay, we're not doing well here. What strategies do we need to put in place? But I also like to highlight, well, what are the things that we're doing well so we can continue to do it, and to see if there's some transfer of knowledge that we can look at in other places. So I also didn't want it to be a punitive process, because staff were so in child welfare. Staff are used to taking blame. If there's a child death, if something went wrong with the case, you know, all the blame goes on to staff. And so I wanted to create a process where it was impunitive, but it was informative. It was a lab of learning. It's where we can have an open exchange of ideas. And so that lasted for a couple of years. And honestly, what happened was, once I stopped paying attention to the lawsuit and the exit standards that we had to meet and started focusing on the practice, things began to shift. Honestly, things began to shift. Because, you know, you can have this checklist. You do this, you check that off. You do this, you check that off. And then one day I was just like, wait a minute. This checklist and what we actually need to do in practice, they don't align. And when I focus on really good practice of what we need to do with engaging families, over time we began to see how things improved. And then the measures and the checklists began to check themselves off. So in a nutshell, on a very high level, the finish line was kind of the incubator of how we utilize data, how we utilize practice. Practice then delved into what policies we need to put in place. And at times we needed to also draft legislation so that we could ensure those things are instituted.
That's great information. And what I liked about what you said was going back and looking at the process and the data and bringing everything together and identifying, okay, this is not moving the way we want it to. And being able to come back and say, hey, let's bring these steps. Let's do this step. Let's get more people involved. Let's get this department involved. Because I really think a lot of people sometimes go top up and not bring in the people that's doing the work every day. You know, and from my experience with dealing with management, organizational leadership and stuff like that, sometimes organizational leaders make ideals according to things that they done 5, 10, 15 years ago. And you think about it, that's probably how we got into these situations, these lawsuits as it is. So we have to change the mindset. And I always say 1994 policy and procedures can't get us in 2024. Something has to change. Processes has to change. And sometimes you need an innovative leader. And what is amazing, and I share this with people all the time, it may not be anything new.
Right.
It's just about, hey, I'm bringing a different process. Mm-hmm. It's exactly what everybody's been doing. The work has been done. But how do we change that process in order to get us over that hump? And then another thing that you said, when you start identifying measures and taking steps after steps, just like I was explaining to one of my facilities today, as they had changed a lot of the processes on how they've been working and moving in the hospital for years. And we've made a change within the last 2 weeks. And even the CEO and the CEO in training and the CNO and the risk analyst manager of the facility, they came and said, hey, we should have done this 5, 10 years ago. And all it takes is one idea with a process. And they were like, hey, we don't want to get ourselves too excited, but within the last 2 weeks, hey, we haven't been having 5, 6, 7 colds every day. And the colds we have been having is minor colds. It's nothing major. And that's when I tell them, I've always led with this concept and this theory. Small victories lead to greater success. Yeah. Because the thing with small victories is you can start marking it off, marking it off, and marking it off. A small victory is nothing but a step that's been accomplished. And anybody know anything about a step, you get enough steps up there, you don't reach your goal. You may not know that you don't reach it, but you wake up one day and you have reached it. And so it's very important, good information that you provide. So let me ask you this. How do you define your style of leadership?
I really have two styles. One is servant leadership. When I was getting my master's, I read up on servant leadership by Robert Greenleaf, I believe. And yes, it does carry a biblical principle with it. Yes. Jesus saying, I came to this earth to serve, not to be served. And how I show up in spaces is no matter the position, I thought it'd be important that the team see that, you know, I've done this work. I've carried cases. I've engaged families. There was never a time or a moment where I could not engage an older youth, and staff would see that. They were like, oh my God, the director? Yeah, absolutely. I was willing to get in, you know, get my hands dirty, so to speak. I recall when COVID began, no vaccines, we didn't know anything. People, of course, were dying, and there wasn't a lot that the public health community knew. We had our very first case of two youth, one age 9 and one age 11, to where both the grandmother and mother were in intensive care. Both youth had contracted COVID. You really couldn't find staff that were willing, one, to transport them, and you couldn't find foster parents to place them because they had their own kids and they were afraid to be contracted with COVID. And so the director of the agency, at close to 12 midnight that night, I said, I got to go in. There was a staff person that decided that they would transport. And again, we didn't know a lot about the virus, but I went in. I told them, bring them up the stairway, because then we needed to sanitize because we had to do that. That's what we knew to do. We kind of quarantined off a section in a room because no one would take them. So guess what? They had to stay in the building. And we had to find staff that would provide like this further than 6 feet supervision for those youth. But again, that just went to show staff. And when I left the agency, here's the interesting part. The staff person came to me and said, I don't know if you remember when we had COVID, but I remember you stepped in. And I was like, what is he doing here? So the servant leadership part is that I wanted them to see, and it wasn't even servant leadership in my mind at the time. It was that we needed to get the job done. There's a 9-year-old and 11-year-old without a mother and without a grandmother who they are accustomed to going home with. We're the strangers to them. So this is the work that we do, right? But I didn't think about that. So, but the point of the story is that the staff saw that I was serving. The second leadership style, I would say, is situational leadership. And what that is, and at least how it's served me well, is as conditions change, as the environment changes around you, so you must shift, whether that's policy, whether that's practice, whether that's your approach. Because what I have seen with many organizations, whether it's public organizations in government or private, is they do the same thing for a long time and they expect to get this result, or they expect to meet their outcomes, right? That's because they haven't taken an environmental scan internally and externally to see, wait a minute, something has shifted. And if there's a shift, that means that you also have to pivot. But just like when you mentioned, like staff who may have been veterans for a long time, they've been doing it the same way all the time. That is why you continue to get the same results.
Absolutely.
So both have been, I've served well using servant leadership and situational leadership.
Those are two good ones that I like. Of course, servant leadership, what I like about servant leadership is, is Robert Greenleaf. And I used him for the basis of my dissertation, which talks about, is there a leadership behavior or a leadership style that works best for family service workers in order to prevent turnover? And it became very important to me from being in DCS for so long and seeing people come in and go, come in and go, come in and go. And it just took a little bit deeper, just child welfare as a whole. The numbers from Texas to Oregon, all the way to Washington and back into Nashville. Very disturbing numbers, even to 2023. Davidson County, dealing with the state of Tennessee, had a turnover rate of 123%. That is astronomically crazy. So that's saying that not only are you losing the people that you get in up front, you're also losing your veterans in the back. And that, to me, that's an issue. That's a major issue, you know, and that's another topic another day, you know, in dealing with that. But in these type of environments, servant leadership, I'm with you, number one. And then also I use transformational leadership, which is, you know, coincides with servant leadership, because it's all about, hey, I'm not going to tell you to do anything that I'm not willing to do myself. And just like you, one of the most COVID, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes about the workforce and what are we as leaders are willing to do. And you know, we had everything at this time. I was at the Juvenile Detention Center, and I mean, we had stepped up. I mean, we was good. We was great. Leaders, we had trained, we had to move it. Well, the corporate people for the company I was working with said we had too many people on the floor. We had too many people working. We had all this going on. Then guess what? They started sending people to other facilities. And then once they started doing that, then guess what happened? COVID happened. So when COVID happened, everybody was, you know, yeah, some people, all they needed was an excuse not to come to work. All they needed was an excuse to say, hey, I'm going to get this stimulus check. I'm good on top of whatever, instead of being in that dangerous environment. And that was one of the things that our directors was myself started getting with the staff and other organization leaders. Hey, we got to do this. We are always, you know, I tell people we are juvenile correctional officers first. If you're in the hospital, you are a behavioral health associate first. We are whatever that floor line position, that's everybody's position. And we cannot ever get to the point that we are better than that position. And so that's what you showed them, is that you're not, just because you had a title, your title didn't dictate your actions.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this, and feel free to ask me questions as well. You know what I'm saying? It's not one way. I have somebody, I open it like this, they start asking me questions like they show. So feel free. So let me ask you this. When you are training people, because, you know, I feel that most organization leaders always prepare people for when they prepare to lead. You always have someone that's ready, or a couple of people that's ready to take that position. And I explain to people, you should never be comfortable. And it doesn't offend me when you tell me you want my position. I find that a compliment, because it means you're going to do the work to get here. You know what I'm saying? So as you have gone up through your rank, you know, from Tennessee to Washington, D.C., what is it that you have looked for in people to say, I see this in them? And it don't necessarily have to be a position that you were in, but maybe somebody that could become a great supervisor, because you see the skills, or even most important, you see the care.
That's a good question. I'm going to respond to that in this way, because something that I brought new to the agency I used to run was unheard of. It was unorthodox. I remember being in a meeting with our managers. We would meet with them regularly, monthly. And I decided to ask them in public, in front of everyone, what do you plan to be in the next 2 to 3 years? Is there a position inside of the organization that interests you? And everyone, you know, kind of looked like deer with a headlights. And I said, I really want you to speak freely. I said, I'm gonna tell you why. I said, what government hasn't done well, and because of the nature of how it operates, is succession planning. It's easy to do that in the private sector, right? But in our field, it's hard because it's unpredictable because you don't know who's going to be here and who's not. So, but I did ask them that question. But before I asked them, this is what happened. I was a deputy at one point, and I was on a panel with other deputies in our organization. And it was 5 of us, and I was the last one to answer a series of questions. And it came to me. And that same question was asking me, like, what's next? And I did this pause for about 5 seconds because my director was sitting right on the front row. And I went ahead and took this risk. I said, I want to be the next director of Child and Family Service Agency in the District of Columbia. And the entire room had this loud applause and like standing ovation. And I could not believe the words that came out of my mouth. After that, it was crazy. I didn't, I just said it out loud. Something I've been thinking, something I've been wanting to do. After that, the director came to me and she said, so you want my job? I said, no, I don't want your job, but I would like to be the director. And this is a true story. She'll even tell you that. And she said, well, let's talk about that. Little did I know, she was planning on retiring. Right. And when we met, she said, let's put together an 18-month succession plan. She said, because there are things that you have not been introduced to when you sit in the director's chair. The programs you all know. She said, but there's the politics of this job that you have not been introduced to. And politics in Washington, D.C. is unlike any other politics in any other major city or state in the country. So anyway, long story short, she said, there's only one thing you need to know as we go through this process. The mayor decides who she wants to be over this agency, and it's by appointment and by confirmation. She said, all I can do is make the recommendation. And I said, okay. So we went through 18 months. I got more ingrained in finance. I got more ingrained in HR and legal stuff that, in the program side, I would never have been exposed to. But when the day came and she announced her retirement, the mayor wanted to meet with me and her people. And I met with them and they grilled me. I left the meeting. 5 minutes after the meeting, her director of talent acquisition said, out of my 20 years, I've never seen anyone as prepared. Now, the reason why I wanted to say that was critical to your question. Mm-hmm. One, I'm a type of person that believes that it's extremely important to have succession planning for operational readiness. We are in a field to where the work shouldn't be centered around one personality, one individual. And the authority and decision making shouldn't be centralized from that one person either. You have a whole team. Allow them to operate in their authority. So to your question, when I got in the director's role, day one, when I chose my chief of staff, I said, we're beginning succession planning today. Because I wanted to think about doing this in a whole different way. One, because I never knew when I was going to leave. Right. But I felt like if I started it early, and one, I wanted to see, did she have any interest? And she did. But I also, as I worked with all of my deputies, I wanted to know what all of your interests are. Do you want to be a director? Do you want to do this? Or do you want to do something different? That way, I began to do what I call really strengthening and building the bench in all tiers of management. I did it from deputies to administrators to program managers to supervisors. And it really opened up a different type of culture for our organization of the silent thoughts that people have because they don't want people to know, oh, yeah, I do want your job. So people wouldn't feel envious or people wouldn't feel like you're gunning for it. But we could do it in a really intentional and planful way to where, look, y'all, we're not going to be here forever. So you're not going to be a deputy forever. You serve at the pleasure of who the director is or who the mayor is. You may be unionized or not. So let's do our due diligence that, first of all, the mission of this organization is to ensure safety, permanence, and well-being for kids. The only way we're going to do that is if we have operational readiness and we can have an operation built to sustain. So once I built that into the culture of succession planning in a government agency, which was unheard of, as people left, people could step up. We didn't have to worry about it. Took months and months to recruit and onboard people because it was an intentional process. And so that's one of the things also I think, which is great, I think in my legacy there is having that intentional process. As one person step out, someone can step up. We build the internal talents, training the people for those positions and for those roles.
That's good stuff. And what I like about that is you took almost a teaming approach with everybody in order to be successful. And one of the things that I studied is the teaming approach really didn't even have a definition when I first started my dissertation. And what I found out is I think the teaming approach, it wasn't even a leadership style, but it really is. It's a leadership style, a leadership approach, because from the 90s, no one really talked about leadership approach. And as you got into like 2010, everything is about, hey, let's put a team around it. Let's stop using individuals to accomplish one specific thing. Let's bring 5 or 6 people or whatever that team looks like. Let's bring numerous of ideas. Let's bring different perspectives into one room and let's work with this in order to get numerous different ideas from various people, because, you know, I might see things in one perspective, somebody else might see something else, and then we both sit there, then you got somebody say, hey, I can put this and this together, we get this. So the teaming approach has been very important. On top of that, the succession planning. I think a lot of people are scared of a succession plan.
They are.
But my opinion is, if you are scared of a succession plan, and this is just my opinion, if you are scared of a succession plan, that means you don't got complacent and comfortable.
Yes.
And that means to me, you are no good for the organization. You are no good for the people that you're leading, because this is how you get some people, and this is one of the things that I seen at Department of Children's Services. You have people that are 30, 40 years in certain positions. They wasn't going to move, didn't want to move. They was cool with that position. You know what I'm saying? But the problem is the knowledge has become stagnant. You got people who don't want to take on leadership classes, don't want to take on new education, don't want new training. There's always, I got it. And they don't understand that hurts everybody. And ultimately it hurts your customers, which is in this situation, the child or even the patient. You know what I'm saying? So I like that. I like that. And I continue to go the importance of a succession plan. I don't know if you know. Do you know Lee Iacocca?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Lee Iacocca was the head man with Chrysler. And when he took Chrysler, Dodge, and I mean mainly Chrysler, took Chrysler to a whole nother level. They started booming. But when Lee Iacocca left, the company suffered. There wasn't a realistic succession plan for the person that took his position. So you just had a bunch of wealth of knowledge that walked out the door, because no one took the time to say, hey, what are we looking? I mean, it goes from him as a leader and everybody that worked up under him, which I find, you know, it's a disservice. But I like the concept of going through the room, and it's scary. We think a lot alike. That's scary. One of the things that I've always done as an organizational leader is I believe that in our meetings, I want everybody to give their opinions.
Absolutely.
Before we leave a meeting. And it's many, you know, I give a specific question of concern, and I want everybody to give their 2 cents on it. And it's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is I want people to understand your opinion really does matter. Because now you give an opinion, how do we become solution focused in that? And then the other reason, it cuts out mess. I used to get tired of hearing people when they walk out of a meeting, they had more complaints than they had when they was in the meeting. And so what happened is it changed the environment because you had steps that said, hey, I'm not getting into that, because if you really wanted to address that, you should address that in that meeting. So you didn't address it. You want to talk about it now. So what it does, it pushes people like, I don't want to be bothered. So it cuts out a lot of the foolishness and the back talk, and it prepares people when you come into a meeting to always be solution focused. And everything does not have to be negative. Everything don't have to be negative. Let's work on being solution. Let's find an answer, because there's people's lives at hand here.
Correct.
It's their livelihood as they sell, and it's the livelihood of your patients or your customers and whoever it is at that moment in time. You know what I'm saying? So very, very critical information. Got anything for me?
Well, I'm curious, when you, which I totally adopt as well in terms of letting staff know, listen, I'm interested in your input, because I want them, one, to feel a part, and I want their buy-in. And I always start with, we may not agree, we may not reach consensus, but it is important that I hear your perspective and opinion. My question is, have you ever found a time where there's been conflict? Because when we're talking about leadership, I think leaders should always be prepared for conflict. And from my perspective and from my experience, conflict doesn't always have to be negative, depending on how it's navigated. But I'm interested kind of how you approach that.
This is my perspective on life. I welcome conflict. The reason I welcome it is because a lot of times people want to bring conflict to see how you're going to respond. And I'm just the type of person, conflict doesn't bother me. I always try to find a resolution. I always try to find a silver lining and a positive in it. The problem with conflict with most people is it's something that they want to remain negative. And my thing is, if I understand that as organization leader, that we all understand in this position, that's a lonely position, number one. Number two, we understand that all eyes is on us. No matter what you say, what you do, all eyes is on you.
Right.
And as you're able to move in a positive way, you have to understand that this has to be who you are. Yeah, people is watching you, but it's how you respond genuinely. You know what I'm saying? And I like to consider myself a walking conflict resolution. Now, do a lot of people agree with my approach? Of course not. Do a lot of people agree with my tone? Of course not. But I explain to people my tone is never disrespectful. My tone is about the business. And when I say that, it's not saying that I'm being harsh. No, I'm just standing on business to say this is my expectation. It's not personal. This is business. And I'm one that believe that the theory approach that they came out with years ago, emotional intelligence, I think it's one of the worst theories ever, because you cannot lead an organization dealing with emotion. And that's what they was trying to say. You got to welcome the emotions and help people get through certain things. And I find through research, I think that's a trap. And research show that it doesn't work in a lot of industries. And speaking with stuff like that, I want people to come, hey, let's discuss the facts. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to necessarily hear an opinion at the moment. Let's discuss the fact. What is the fact? Let's give a situation. We have 200 kids a day that doesn't have a place to stay. Okay. All right. How are we going to handle this? Well, I feel that we should do blank, blank, blank because I'm tired of staying here. That's not solution focused.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you get when a lot of people start talking from their emotion. And then when one group of people start talking with their emotion, it escalates and escalates and escalates. So I welcome conflict, but I welcome to the point that I want people to see that conflict is not, like you said earlier, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Most people think it is. You just got to know how to confront it and be able and be prepared for it. Because what you know is in these positions, no matter what we do, stuff gonna come at us.
Right.
And it's stuff that's gonna come out the blue. You're like, where did that one come from? But nevertheless, you got a crew of people looking and waiting to see how you're gonna respond.
Right. And in my experience with staff, and of course, this had to be built upon in terms of trust. Any number of concerns they would bring. I was like, first of all, the director's door is open, which they were not accustomed to. First of all, they never even knew where the director's office was, my predecessor. She just was not one that's you're not just going to walk up in her office. So
right.
She was just that type.
Right.
Mine, you could. But one of the things, well, several things I told them, similar to what you just mentioned, I was like, start with the facts. I said, I can't help you, I can't support you unless I know the facts. That's where we start. Now, if it is a issue or concern like with your supervisor, I always tell them, please understand the only way I can assist in rectifying this is if I bring your supervisor in here as well. So he or she can hear what you are saying. You don't have to worry about like any retaliatory action because that's not the type of organization that I run. And if you by chance get that, you know where to come. So it took time for people really to feel comfortable and feel psychological safety in doing that. It was the other thing. Number of times they would do that. I bring the supervisor, and many times it boiled down to differences in how they communicate or lack thereof, trying to assume people's intention and motive based on an experience they may have had with someone else. But they always said, you know, this may not have been resolved the way that I wanted it, but you were always fair.
Absolutely.
And that left me with, okay, because I don't think all these issues can be resolved to your liking or to your liking, but if you felt that I was a neutral party and that it was fair, you know, that's the great thing about it. And the last part, when I mentioned prior, is how you navigate conflict. I also studied the conflict theory. One of my masters, I think it was George Simmel, he's a German sociologist, and he likened it unto family and marital therapy, or actually, well, he did, family and marital therapy. And it was when you have a married couple who come to a clinician for therapy to kind of sort out their issues. And sorting out their issues can look messy, can look ugly, and that's where the conflict kind of surfaces. But he really spent time on focusing on now, after we resolve the conflict, we come out on the other side of it. And so what that meant was, it didn't necessarily mean it was negative. The important part is how you navigate it, how you manage it, so you can come out, you know, on the other side. So I was just interested to ask that because that came top of mind because most leaders, well, I'm gonna say some leaders actually, don't necessarily facilitate conflict in the best way because of what you mentioned, the emotion that comes to it. If people begin to learn a bit, and I know it's difficult because we're humans, to separate kind of that personal from professional, knowing that we're in a professional environment. This is not a personal attack against you. That may be hard to say because for some people, because we're human, if they got a history and they're trouble, you'd be like, oh, him again. Oh, she's up in my office again. Then there's some of that bias and subjectivity in that. But if you can, and if you really try to veer toward the center and try to really look at things in an objective way, and the objective way to do it is from what you mentioned. Give me the facts. If I get the facts, then we can really have to navigate to where we can find that resolution. And again, it may not come out on the side that you would like it, but it will be a fair process.
And I'm thinking in a situation like that, what I like to always identify with both parties is, after you give me the facts, and I know this is like skipping over in the between, but I like to get the facts, and then I say, before we start discussing this, what do you want the outcome to look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because if not, you can have a bunch of talking going on, but there's no goal, no one to get to. But if you identify what that outcome is going to look like, it's going to take a lot of that personal stuff up out of there. And it's going to start talking, now you're working at, I think you said a roadmap earlier.
Yeah.
Now you're working on a roadmap to get where you got to go. And then another thing, and this is why I came up with the company, the Raw Approach. One, because it sounds good. Because just the dealing with the Raw Approach, sometimes it goes back to what I was saying. Some things you just can't sugarcoat.
Right.
A lot of people like for things to be sugarcoat. It feels good and it sounds good to the ear, but that's not life. That's not life at all.
Right.
Some things, it is what it is, because you can't